immediately strengthen the economy today and make the investments necessary to grow the economy for tomorrow. Let me be clear. We will balance the budget by 2017-18.
Good evening and welcome to Talk Local. I'm Greg Mercer and I'm glad you could join us. So Ontario's minority Liberal government is planning $5.7 billion in new spending as part of an ambitious budget that was released today. Tonight we'll examine what that budget means for Waterloo Region, whether it may be a platform for a possible provincial election. So let's get right to it. We have a lot of people we want to talk to tonight, but we're pleased to be started off by with Greg Durocher, who is the CEO and President of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for coming, Greg.
Nice to be here, Greg.
And we have Michael Drucker, who is a local transit advocate. Thank you for coming, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
So, Greg, I'll start with you. You've had a chance to look at the budget.
Yes.
What do you make of it?
It's probably, in recent history, the worst provincial budget I've ever seen.
Okay. What makes you say that?
It's very bad for business. It's going to be regressive from an employment perspective, from an investment perspective. It's taxing people.
Okay.
We have the deficit going in the wrong direction.
Right.
In actual fact, they're talking about increasing the deficit now for 2014. And are accumulating. Right now, we're going to be at $289 billion in debt.
That's a problem.
It's a huge problem. It's the largest debt of any province or territory in the country. Our deficit is larger than the accumulative deficits of of all the provinces and territories. It's just going in the wrong direction, and it seems to be a tax and spend type of budget. Instead of looking at, I think Don Drummond brought it up good when he originally did his document a long time ago, and said if Ontario doesn't follow this path of fiscal restraint and making some difficult decisions, you can look at what Ontario is going to look like in another 10 years, and that's Greece. And in fact, that's where we seem to be going. We're packing on the debt. People are going to lose 1.9% of their income right now because of this mandatory Ontario pension plan. Businesses are going to have to support that as well with another 1.9%.
Right.
That just stops business investment, and that is not a job creation program. And I think in reality, Greg, this is what I think it was. I think it was a budget to get a provincial election.
Okay.
I think that the minority Liberals actually said, let's put out a budget there that nobody's going to be able to support so that we can have an election and let's settle this battle once and for all. And I think that's exactly what's happened.
Okay, Michael, I want to bring you into this. There are a lot of things promised in this budget, but one thing that would be exciting to folks in the pro-transit community is some significant money for public transit. I think it's something in the range of $13.9 billion for projects outside of the GTA is a promise.
That's right.
Is that a good thing on the surface?
I mean, I think it's a very good direction outlined in the budget. So a lot of the elements that it focuses on are ones that make a lot of sense from our perspective, from the Tri-Cities Transport Action Group. So the focus on regional connectivity through transit, through better rail service, is one that we're very much in support of.
Okay.
The concept of frequent regional rail service all day, GO Transit, is a very, very big win if that happens. So we're happy to see a dedicated fund for that, but it's clear that there isn't at this point the will in the current Parliament for actually increasing substantially investment that's not just a redirection. So that's one of the things that we're seeing with the current budget. It's redirecting some funding towards transit, which is good.
You're talking about the gas tax, that kind of thing, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there were a number of revenue tools proposed by Metrolinx, and very few of them got any traction among the parties at this point. And that's a shame because we're not investing enough in infrastructure, especially in transit infrastructure. So it's a challenge to get to the kind of competitive transit and walking and cycling infrastructure in this province that helps people make different choices about how they get around and helps create better communities.
So how do we pay for it, I guess is the question folks might ask.
That's a good question. So I mean, one of it's that sort of depends on what people are comfortable with on a large scale. So there's certainly general kind of general taxes, of course, but there's also prioritization between different projects. So that's one of the things that we're not seeing enough interest in, which is reconsidering projects like the 401 widening. It's really a bit odd when we're talking about expanding transit, and at the same time expanding roads that already exist. It's not creating any new connections. It's just expanding an existing road that's overburdened to a large extent because there's no alternative.
Okay.
So
I wonder, Greg, we're running out of time. Look, I asked, bring you back into this. A couple things. This Ontario pension plan, what could that mean for employers? Can they afford it? And also, this money to help new businesses set up, $2.5 billion for new businesses to set up shop. Is that not good for business?
Absolutely, that's good for business, and that program already exists. So that's just, all that's really doing is extending an existing program. Here's what you got to understand. If you go right now and say to, first of all, you as an employee of a company, your paycheck is going to be 1.9% less next week and the rest of the year, and your employer has now got to match that fund. At the same time, what the province has said is they're going to adopt a parallel system to all other provinces who have accepted the pooled pension program that the federal government instituted, which in most provinces is mandatory employer contribution. So all of a sudden now you're creating an element of where businesses, small businesses in particular, have got to reinvest back into their employees through their pension and their retirement program, which is great. That's fine, if they can afford to do it. But many businesses, small businesses in particular, can't afford to do it right now. They've also taken off the small business deduction. So which would reduce small business tax on the first $500,000 from 11.5% down to 4.5%. I have no idea how the provincial government thinks by burdening business and small business with extra taxes, with the deduction being taken away, that they think that they're going to spawn any growth at all in the province. It's totally impossible. Businesses will invest if they've got the resources to do it. Take those resources away, they can't invest, so they won't create jobs, and that's a problem.
Well, we'll have to leave it at that. We've run out of time, gentlemen. Thank you very much, and we'll be back after the break.
Are the same as those shared by Ontarians. We know that Ontario is stronger when we're all working together as one Ontario. We know that when we look out and help our neighbours, we lift one another up. Very important. And we know that to build a better quality of life for ourselves and our children and our grandchildren, we must continually move forward, look ahead, and plan, not just for the times we live in, but for the decades to come.
Okay, welcome back to Talk Local, where we're continuing our look at the provincial budget that was released today by the Wynne government. For more reaction now and some analysis, we are pleased to be joined by Peter Woolstencroft, who is a veteran observer of politics. He's a professor of political science at the University of Waterloo. Thanks for joining us, Peter.
My great pleasure.
So, Peter, first, can you help, for people at home, make sense of this? There's a lot of politics at play here in this budget. What are some of the strategies being employed by the Liberals as you see them?
Well, I think they're trying to put a lot of pressure on the NDP. People have to remember we have a minority government. If we had a majority government, we'd have a different kind of budget, I believe. So it's a feel-good budget. It's the kind of thing that the NDP should like. In fact, I've heard some Labour people say, hey, this is a pretty good budget. So the NDP would be under a lot of pressure to support this.
Okay.
But Andrea Horwath doesn't want to support the Liberals. So, and the Liberals know they may be defeated or they may go to the polls themselves. And this is a feel-good budget because the tax increases are kind of limited.
Right.
I mean, it's just the 2%. Like, we don't know any of those people, do we? And cigarette smokers, I feel sorry for them because they can't avoid the tax. And the aviation fuel, well, who will notice that? There's no budget cuts I thought this was interesting. In a province with an enormous deficit and an accumulated public debt, there's no cuts. Now, you go to the province of Quebec, their budget deficit is about $4 billion. They're going through a root and branch examination of their public finances because they got a majority government and they know they have a problem.
But not here.
Not here. In fact, we're increasing the debt, and the Minister of Finance says we're going to get that off the books by 17, 18. I don't think so. It's a feel-good budget because they are presupposing that the much vaunted expansion of the American economy is going to happen.
Right.
And Ontario will be dragged along happily with that.
So you're not holding out a lot of hope that this budget's going to be balanced within a few short years. It seems.
I'm willing to take bets that it's not.
Okay. So what kind of a jam does this put the NDP in now? They've been given
Big jam.
a 1 week deadline, is that right?
Yeah, that's what the Premier said. You got 1 week to make up your mind.
Okay, so-
And I mean, that's why Andrea Horwath, and this, I was trying to think, has this ever happened before? Well, not that I know of, where a party leader is invisible. I mean, where'd she go?
Right.
You know, what is she doing?
But aren't there some good items in here for the NDP?
Oh, I think so. And I listened to Sid Ryan, one of our province's labor leaders, and he thought it was fantastic. He said, if this was an NDP budget, yay. It's not, but still yay. And there'll be other people like him who say we should support this because, and he said it very bluntly, this would be better than anything that Tim Hudak would do, right?
I want to ask you a little bit about the deficit this is projecting. I think $12.5 billion deficit. Second year in a row, the deficit has increased rather than decreased.
Sure.
Do you think voters care about that?
Well, here's the great tragedy of our commons in Ontario. 50% of Ontarians don't care because they don't go out and vote. And most Ontarians, will, when you ask them, will talk about local stuff or personal stuff. They're worried about the schools and colleges, universities, healthcare. This is a big abstraction, you know, the deficit. And to me, it's a big problem because I don't think we're going to shake this tiger for a long time. And they're presupposing, when I heard the Minister of Finance this afternoon talking about our projected economic growth in Ontario, I almost fell off my Chesterfield.
Right.
What? I've never seen such high projections in recent times for the province of Ontario. So there's a lot of optimism there. This is a feel-good budget, and the Premier is going to go around the province if it's an election saying, yay, 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 everything's fine.
What do they do if this is passed, the NDP supports it, and then they have to carry this out? I mean, what kind of trouble do you think we might be in?
Big.
Okay.
How about that? No, I try to be cheerful in my day-to-day interactions, but I'm pessimistic because the province of Ontario's financial situation, as one of your earlier guests was talking about very cogently, is not good at all. It stands out as a big stinker. We're in a worse budgetary situation than the state of California, which is 3 times our size. Now, we have nothing to be happy about.
People at home might say, well, why do we need to pay down the deficit? What's the big deal? Well, I want new highways. I want new schools. I want to have...
Of course we do, yeah.
What's the problem with buying stuff we like?
How old are you, Greg?
No, I'm playing devil's advocate. But
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to make some choices, and this is a feel-good, let's have a happy time kind of budget, because I don't think the provincial government is taking into account all their labor negotiations that have to come down the pike in the broader public sector. Sure, we want all kinds of things. I mean, I want better transportation to Toronto. I want better trains, and all those kinds of things. I want all kinds of things on the healthcare, education front. I want people to be looked after in their old age. If I were a small business person in this province, or if I was a person thinking of investing in a small business in this province, would I be happy? Not with minimum wage going up, not with hydro going up, not with the CP or the Ontario pension plan, whatever it be called, be coming into effect. I have all kinds of business costs that are going to make it very difficult for me to imagine making my business thrive.
what big ticket items jumped out at you when you were sort of scanning the budget today? Was there something that were surprised by?
I was surprised that the finance minister was so confident that by 17-18 that we will have a balanced budget. And that's a big budget item for me. And I know we're going to spend more money on hospitals, we're going to spend more money on social services, more money on universities and colleges. In fact, I think we should spend more money in colleges and less money in universities. I think that the present government has been unable to say, this is a bad idea, we're not going to do this. And they're not making any cuts at all. And when I look at other governments in a majority situation, they do the difficult thing of saying, you know what, this looks like a good idea, but it's very expensive. And the problem with politics is there's a lot of good ideas, but you have to cost them out and say, well, is it really worth the money that we're asked to invest?
Well, just the last thing very quickly, how much of a change in direction is this from some of the austerity we saw under Kathleen Wynne's predecessor, Dalton McGuinty?
Well,
change in direction?
we had, in the early days with Dalton McGuinty, we had, let's spend, spend, spend. And then in the last couple of years, he suddenly saw the reality. And the Liberals paid a big price in all those by-elections, including the one at Kitchener-Waterloo, because they put the hammer to the public sector. So I think if the Liberals get a majority, they will have to impose a tough austerity budget. They can't keep on spending this way.
Okay, we'll have to leave it at that. Peter, we really appreciate your insight, and thank you for talking to us about this.
My great pleasure.
We'll be right back after the break.
Let me be clear. We will balance the budget by 2017-18. We will invest where we must. We will cut expenses where we can. Mr. Speaker, the government rejects reckless cuts advocated by some, while at the same time rejecting risky ideas of others. Instead,
Welcome back to Talk Local. On tonight's show, we're continuing to examine the provincial budget that was released earlier today by the Wynne government. That's a plan that includes some $5.7 billion in new spending. So for another perspective on that budget, we are pleased to be joined by Michael Harris. He is the Progressive Conservative MPP for Kitchener-Conestoga. And thanks for coming in, Michael.
Greg, thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, first off, I'm going to ask you, what do you think of this budget?
Well, look, Greg, this was a tax and spend Kathleen Wynne budget, really with two fundamental purposes. One, either to buy off the NDP or pander to voters in a potential election. Look at they've overcome a major feat. They've increased taxes by $3 billion, and the deficit is going to climb to $12.5 billion from around 11.1 now. Right. So that's a major accomplishment when you're taxing more, but yet your deficit's going to continue to climb. So you know what, we've seen today that they have no intention on getting our fiscal house in order, and really no plan to get the hundreds of thousands of Ontarians back to work.
Well, the Liberals say, no, we're going to stimulate the economy. We're spending money in the right areas to create jobs, and we are going to balance the books by 2017-18. So what do you say to that?
Well, if you believe that they'll actually balance the books in 2017 by 2018, then I think I saw dozers on Highway 7 too when I drove in. So look at, additional spending, additional taxation in the form of $3 billion on Ontarians, with a deficit of $12.5 billion. In fact, $20 billion in new debt. In fact, they've got a higher deficit than any other province combined. And we have to get our fiscal house in order. It's simply said, because that money that we're going to spend on interest payments, around $10 billion a year, could go to social programs, healthcare, education, but instead it's being shipped overseas so that they can invest in their healthcare and education. So it's truly a shame, and really there's no plan to get the 500,000 Ontarians back to work. And fundamentally, we're the only party, the Ontario PC Party is the only party that'll get its fiscal house in order and create 1 million jobs for those that need them here in Ontario.
I want to ask you about some of the specifics, though. We're talking about $2 billion for Ontario schools, new money for highways, $1 billion for social services, more money for new businesses. Aren't those good things for Ontario?
Well, look at clearly investments need to be made in healthcare, education, our infrastructure, but they're continuing to go back to Ontarians, tax them more to pay for all kinds of things. Sure, it's great. Glenn Murray was just in town yesterday or in London announcing the potential for a high-speed train. Yet, we still don't have 4 trains in and back through our GO transit system. We still don't have Highway 7 built. So they can talk and list off a whole lot of goodies, but will this government actually come through? The only thing they've actually come through on is increasing our taxes. They're good at that and getting us further into debt. So we, as the Ontario PC Party, have a plan to get our fiscal house in order, but create 1 million jobs. Get hydro under control, because people, they open up their bill every month, and it's continuing to go up and up and up. Manufacturers here in our local community have a difficult time paying extremely high hydro rates. And so these are fundamental things that have to get under control, including our debt payments that, like I had mentioned, $10 billion a year. These are things, precious dollars, that are being sucked out of the system. Eventually it'll catch up, and Kathleen Wynne will bankrupt our province.
I'm going to ask you about taxes. The Liberals say, we're not actually increasing taxes on the middle class. We're increasing taxes on folks who earn more than $150,000 a year. So what's wrong with asking people who earn more to contribute more?
Well, regardless how you see it, they're taxing Ontarians $3 billion more. I talked to a constituent of mine just yesterday, and he said, you know what, I feel like the government have their hands in my pockets that I can't even get my own in them. Hydro rates are something that we hear, seniors on a fixed income talk about, that they can no longer afford to stay in their own home because the hydro is too expensive. So, they talk about an Ontario-made pension program that's going to take, 2% out of folks' paycheck, but also tax employers for something that we already have the vehicles to save it already. Their paycheck will be less and less. In fact, those that don't have a paycheck won't have a pension at all. And so, we need to get those folks back to work. We've got a plan to do that. Unfortunately, we didn't see one in the budget. We don't believe the team. We have the confidence in the team to do it, and that's why I'll be voting against the budget.
So where does this go from here? I want to say the NDP, we asked Catherine Fife to come on the show if she could talk about what her party plans to do. She couldn't come. She wasn't available. Do you have a prediction of what's going to happen the next week?
Well, look, clearly it shows the NDP have no plan. They have no idea what's up or down. And today, for the first time, the NDP didn't respond. You know what? For a constituent whose member is a New Democrat, to not stand up in the House and actually vote today on the budget, either way, is a disappointment to democracy, and they're not serving their constituents well. So they don't have a plan either to get Ontario back to work, and have no plan to fix our finances in Ontario on the terrible path that we're on. So you know what? It sounds like the government's given a deadline of about a week to the NDP. We'll see where that takes us. I don't have confidence in the government, and I'll be voting against the budget, of course, and we'll see where that takes us.
Do you think voters want an election right now?
I talk to many voters in my community, and they're sick and tired of government wasting their money, whether it be $1 billion on power plants, e-health, Orange, and continually taxing them for more money. They want a government that lives within its means. They want a government that creates a plan to get people back to work. They don't see that from this government. And so eventually we'll need an election. And I know that Ontarians will make the right decision and change the government that is so desperately needed to get Ontario back on track.
Some people might ask the question, well, why do we need to control our spending right now? When the economy is down, shouldn't we be spending to spur some activity?
Well, look, all governments in Canada are reducing, either have no deficit or have made plans to eliminate their deficit, except for Ontario, a $12.5 billion deficit on top of taxing Ontarians more. So we're going in the wrong direction. We should be heading down so that we can reduce our interest payments that, like I said, cost Ontarians $10 billion a year. That's money that we cannot use for healthcare, education, social services, infrastructure that's needed. We have to get our fiscal house in order, or we're simply not going to have the resources that we need down the road. And like I said before, Kathleen Wynne is on the verge of bankrupting Ontario. Look at Dalton McGuinty, I think, would be jealous about the budget today on how they've increased spending, adding $20 billion to our debt, and taxing Ontarians $3 billion more. It's insanity.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it at that. We're out of time. But thanks for coming on, Michael. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll be back after the break. You're watching Talk Local. Welcome back to Talk Local, where we're continuing our look at the provincial budget released today by the Wynne government. We're joined now on the phone by John Malloy. He's the MPP for Kitchener Centre, and of course he's Minister of Community and Social Services. Thanks for doing this, John. We appreciate your time.
Oh, great to. I wish I could be there in person, but I'm still stuck in Toronto.
Hey, well, we know how it goes. John, I just want to ask you, there's a lot in this budget, but could you pick out a few of the big ticket items that you think people in Waterloo Region ought to be paying attention to?
Sure. I mean, the focus is very much on jobs and the economy, and one of the key drivers of that is, of course, infrastructure, and there was more detail in the budget today about our plans for linking us through trains to Toronto, to the Toronto area, which is, of course, such a huge issue in Waterloo Region. More details on moving forward with two-day, all-day go, which is a big priority of our business community, and I think people will be interested in that. We've also outlined or reconfirmed our commitment to Highway 7, and we're going to see shovels in the ground 2015, the fall of 2015, the first, as they call it, pre-construction phase, and then way underway in 2016.
So I have to ask you about the spending involved to do some of these things. This budget predicts a deficit of $12.5 billion. It's the second year in a row that the province's deficit has grown. Realistically, can Ontario afford to spend like this right now?
Well, it depends. I mean, the way you're interpreting it, I would differ with that. We put forward our deficit projections, and in fact, we beat this year our projection of where we thought we would go. We did better last year, admittedly, but we have a plan in place to reach balance by 2017-18. But, you know, you have to be very careful when you're talking about deficits. You can take the approach that we saw from Mike Harris. It was echoed by his namesake. I had a chance to listen in a bit of it, and you can slash and burn and hurt people and slow down the economy, or you can make strategic investments. But when you look at government spending, when you look at the work that we've done in terms of curbing that spending, curbing growth in key areas across the board, what you're seeing is that we have a fiscal discipline, but we acknowledge that we've got to make key investments. Transportation is a huge issue for the economy. The investments that we make in infrastructure will help drive the economy and help drive the type of tax revenue that we need to make sure that we reach that balance. So, the plan is there, but we've got to find that balance in terms of, we may have a deficit in terms of dollars, but we also don't want to create a deficit in terms of infrastructure, in terms of social services, in terms of a whole variety of things.
So can you walk people through the plan then to pay for some of this? Because spending is increasing.
Spending is increasing, but again, we've outlined deficit targets which we've exceeded every year, and we're going to continue to reach over the next number of years. There are some increases to taxes. They're not aimed at the middle class. The top 2% of income earners will be paying a little bit more. There is a tax increase on jet fuel, which obviously affects our airports. A number of measures like that, but we understand that the middle class right now is having a hard time making ends meet. So we certainly stayed away from anything like that.
What do you think happens in the next week? The NDP have been given a deadline of 1 week to show their support or not for this budget. Do you have any thoughts on where we could be headed?
Well, I think people have to realize that the way the rules of the legislature work, we have to have a vote on the budget motion in the near future. And what the Premier indicated to the NDP is, look, I'd like to know within a week what your sense is and how we could work together to make this pass. So I don't think she's being unreasonable, the Premier. Certainly she didn't say we're going to call the vote necessarily. She just said that she wants to be able to sit down with the leader of the New Democratic Party. So, I'm confident. When I look at this budget, for example, we had a session in the riding a number of days ago where the Minister of Community and Social Services came in and spoke about a very significant initiative to reduce wait times for kids with developmental disabilities. It's something that's huge in our community. You see a lot of parents who are at wit's end with particularly older kids who are now young adults who they're struggling with. this plan would actually eliminate the wait lists in two of the key areas. And I guess the question that I would ask my friends in the NDP, and Catherine Fife, obviously my neighbor, are you prepared to stand up and vote against funding for developmental services? Are you prepared to stand up and vote against some pretty significant and very targeted investments in infrastructure that are going to help our community? I'm confident the answer is going to be no. We're going to support it, but ultimately, you know, the Madame Horvath and Catherine Fife and others, they'll speak for themselves. But I think there's a lot in this budget for our community, and if I was an NDP member, I'd be thinking twice before voting against it.
The prospect of an election is looming. Do you think that voters want to go to the polls right now?
No, not at all. You know what voters want? They want us to roll up our sleeves and work together to get things done. And you know, I'm disappointed that we've seen from the Conservative Party we're going to vote against the budget. I mean, they've said it every budget before they've seen it, before they've read it. They've indicated that they're going to vote against it, and they have no interest in sitting down and working. I do give the NDP credit; they have come to the table, and I'm very hopeful that we can work that compromise again this time and see the budget pass.
I want to ask you, a lot of folks have commented on this budget. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce, among them, has said they're concerned about the level of spending. They say it's putting our finances in a dangerous situation, and they say they don't think there's any chance we can balance the books by 2017, 2018.
Well, we have the leanest government in Canada when it comes to per capita spending. We have seen some of the big growth areas. When I got in 2003, huge cost drivers like healthcare. We've brought that under control. They're still increasing because there's demands on healthcare, but at a much more manageable rate. We had Don Drummond come in. It's funny, the opposition often cite him as sort of the holding the answer to it all. Well, the fact is that we're on track to implement 80% of his recommendations. So we've had some pretty big structural changes that we brought into government, and we're going to continue to do that. And we're going to meet our targets in terms of the deficit. Every year we have surpassed those deficit targets, and we're going to continue to meet them going ahead. But at the same time, I've got to tell you, when I meet with a parent with a child with a developmental disability who's been on a waiting list for years, you know, we always say, well, someday we'll get around to it. Well, I think there are a few key areas that we need to invest. When I talk to a commuter who's spending 2 and 3 hours to get to Toronto one way, you know, we've got to make those investments, obviously for fairness of society, but also it makes economic sense. I mean, sometimes you have to invest in things like infrastructure in order to get our economy moving even more. And talk to anyone in the high-tech sector. They'll tell you that transportation infrastructure is their number one concern and their number one impediment to them continuing to grow.
Okay, we'll have to leave it at that. John, we really appreciate your time. Thanks very much for calling in, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks. Great. Bye.
And for the sake of spending, we made choices, just like a government must. And in fact, once again, we are projecting to beat our deficit target by over $400 million. Well,
welcome back to Talk Local. We are continuing to look at the provincial budget that was released today by the Wynne government. So that budget includes some $1 billion in new spending for social services. Among that, $32 million for school nutrition programs. So to help us make sense of what that could mean, we've got Wendy Campbell, Executive Director of the Food Bank of Waterloo Region, and we have Kelly Sue Labus, who is Executive Director of Nutrition for Learning.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, ladies, for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Well, first off, do we know yet, it's a big chunk of money, $1 billion. Do we have any sense of how this may trickle down or what it could mean within our region or for some programs here?
Well, we haven't had a lot of time. It's only been a couple hours to pick it apart, but the highlights that we've seen so far have really shown that the budget is really reflective of some of the work that was done with the Social Assistance Review Commission, and they have kept some of those promises and looked at some of those recommendations by increasing social assistance rates, adding an additional top-up amount for single people, which in this community it represents 27% of the people that are accessing emergency food services in our community. So that was nice to see. But also a lot of focus on children and things around health, medical, dental, which we've seen cutbacks in previous years, and some of those dollars seem to be coming back. And again, we have to pick it apart a little more to understand the impact.
Right.
But from our perspective, from a food bank perspective, working with a network of community programs, it's all those little pieces together that really make a difference in a budget of a family who is living on a limited income.
Kelsey, I want to bring you into this.
Yes.
There's $32 million is pledged for what's being described
Student
as...
nutrition,
Exactly.
yes.
Do we know where this might be spent or how this will trickle down?
We do know a little bit in that we know that some of the money will be going to the Aboriginal communities, which are very underserviced, and many of the northern communities as well. They are dealing with very high food prices, as you know, and of course the Aboriginal communities are really struggling in all forms of financial. So having these programs be able to go into the Aboriginal communities will really help them.
Can you tell us a little bit about your program, Nutrition for Learning,
Yes,
and what it does?
absolutely.
It's not clear if there could be money for it. We don't know that.
We're
right?
hopeful, even if we could get funding for a couple of programs
Okay.
that would help feed up to 200-300 students, which would be a lot. So we right now have about 150 programs in Waterloo Region, feeding over 13,000 children every single day. So that's from South Galt right up to the Woolwich townships, Wellesley townships. So
Right.
it's a lot of children, everything from junior kindergarten right through to high school. And the children are really, it's an inclusive program. So the children are coming from homes that are poverty. There
Okay.
might be medical issues, could be just poor nutrition, and kids just aren't getting what they need to eat. So we provide a very inclusive program where any child can come, and it is very high nutritional standards.
And what's the case for giving kids good food in school? Why do they need that?
Oh, there's so many benefits to this. You know, they obviously health is a huge marker. When we have children who are eating, they don't go to the doctor nearly as much. They don't have as many diseases. Type 2 diabetes can be reduced because it is on the climb right now. Obesity is a real issue with children these days. So with giving them good nutrition every day, that alleviates some of that, mitigates some of those issues. Other things are socialization. You know, if you have children that come together and they eat, it's a real community driver. It brings people together, especially if you have a lot of new Canadians. This might be their only introduction into really a social environment. And as well, because we have over 1,800 volunteers that work with our programs, and most of them are adults, they are spending time with children, and so children are learning how to communicate with adults and teens in a very positive, stable environment.
Wendy, I want to bring you back into this. In the food bank business in Waterloo Region, what are you seeing? Where are we at in terms of 2014? The recession is in our rearview mirror, but you folks are on the front lines of some of the need that's out there.
Yeah, the recession seems to be behind us, but I think there's still some lingering effects of it. And we hear stories every single day of families with children who are still having trouble, you know, putting those 3 meals a day on the table. We're hearing stories of pension and benefits that haven't quite worked out the way that they thought they were going to work out, stories of people who are unable to find suitable employment in a sector that fits with their skills. So lots of different stories and personal challenges, life challenges, aging parents, and one family member has to stay home to look after that aging parent, mental health issues that have arisen from some of the complexities of what people went through the recession. So I think there's still lingering effects, and this harsh winter has been a huge factor in the services we're providing.
Really?
We've seen shelter beds at their max, and we've seen a 5% increase in food that's been going out of our building to over 100 community programs.
What about funding for the food bank? Does it get government funding?
No, we actually don't receive government funding. We
Okay.
do receive a small grant from the region of Waterloo, and we
see.
work very closely with the region and the other members of our food assistance network. The government funding, especially some of the things that were talked about today in the budget, would go directly to the individuals in the community who are on social assistance, who are accessing different programs. But some of the funding will trickle down to those agencies and programs. So we work together as a network to figure out what the balance is. So we know that the government can't do everything that we want. So it's up to us, and how lucky are we to live in this community that has such an amazing network of programs, and we work together to figure out where are the gaps, how can we work together to fill those funding gaps, and we're very proud to be taking the lead in having those conversations with agencies and programs. So as changes do fluctuate in government funding and grant funding and fundraising in the community, we're able to step in and through the support of this community, fill those gaps and make sure that people are fed in our community.
Well, I'll put this last question to both of you. It's this struggle between, we keep hearing that we can't afford to spend the way we're spending right now, and yet there is this need. So how do we marry those two things?
Well, in our
Tracy?
case, we have had to come up with some different solutions in buying food. It used to be that we would give our money to the programs directly, and then they would go out and buy. So the volunteers would actually shop at local grocery stores to help the economy in that area. What we've had to do now is identify a way for us to purchase wholesale, and also work with many large companies, food companies, to see what kind of really deep discount that they can give us so that we can purchase the food and get it to the schools directly. And that's making quite a bit of difference with regard to how our programs are even being run. But there are solutions we had to make. So obviously, too, we're growing. This year, it's going to be at least 10% growth, and that's a lot of children.
Okay, we're out of time. I'm sorry, Wendy. We'll be back after the break. Thank you. Welcome back to Talk Local. I'm Greg Mercer, and for our final segment tonight, we're going to switch gears a bit. We're going to look at potholes and road repairs and one particular infrastructure project that you may have noticed in the City of Kitchener. So we're joined now by Barbara Robinson. She is the Director of Engineering for the City of Kitchener. And thank you, Barbara, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't we start off by talking about the Margaret Avenue Bridge project? There have been some delays and there have been some additional costs. Is that true? Or where is that project at?
Well, actually, Greg, the Margaret Avenue Bridge project is currently on schedule and on budget.
My mistake.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. So, as you know, the bridge had some the existing bridge, the former bridge, had some structural deficiencies and it needed to be removed. So it was taken down last fall and we were busily designing a new bridge and we've got a consultant working on that. The budget that we prepared last fall was $6.3 million and we're currently on that budget. The schedule, we intend to have shovels in the ground, tender the project late July, shovels in the ground in August, and that was our originally anticipated schedule. As you know, on engineering projects, there are sometimes complications.
Of
So,
course.
you know, as of right now, that's what our schedule looks
that's the
like. But
ballpark.
yeah, on time and on budget.
But I suppose what I meant is that we didn't expect to be having to do this work at this point. Is that fair?
Oh, yes, certainly. Yeah, this completely came out of left field. As you know, we inspect our bridges every 2 years, and an inspection revealed some uncertainties with this bridge, and further investigation revealed the fact that we needed to take the bridge down and build a new one.
Okay.
So a significant upset in terms of our budgeting process, that's for sure.
What does it do in terms of the ripple effect to other projects you're trying to complete at the same time in the city? What's the consequence of this?
Well, basically, the consequence is that the $6.3 million we have to spend on the Margaret Avenue Bridge can't be spent on other projects that we originally anticipated spending this year. So the primary funding source for bridges is the same funding source as we use for roads, and that's federal gas tax. So when you pay for gas at the pump, the federal government collects tax money, and cities and municipalities receive some of that tax money back. So that money has been diverted. For this year, we've made some decisions. So for this year, we've diverted the majority of our roads program that we do every year to fund the Margaret Avenue Bridge. We also accessed some tax funds for the replacement, which we typically don't do on bridge projects. Typically, they're funded through improve federal gas tax sources. Now, I will say there's some good news. Recently, we at committee last week, we have identified some surplus funds from some projects that went well last year.
Okay.
So we're just talking to council about whether we can put those surplus funds back into the roads budget to so we can do some of our roads program
see.
this year.
So in practical terms, though, some things will have to wait.
Absolutely, yes.
Are there specific a project or two you can point to say you'd hope to do this year that people may have to wait another year before they see that starting?
So there's not a specific project on the roads program. How we develop that year to year is that we evaluate the state of our pavement using something called a pavement quality index, and we keep track of that year to year. And then we have a priority list of roads that need to be either repaired or replaced. And so once we know how much money we have in a given year, we develop a program based on that, based on the funds that are available to us. So this year, originally we weren't going to do any of those priority roads, but now, depending on council's decision on Monday, we may be able to do some of them.
Do some of that. And this happens. This is in the business of maintaining cities, bridges break down, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I want to ask you a little bit about potholes. Anecdotally, it seems like this is a bad pothole season, that we've had a long, cold winter, and you hear people complaining about it. We know that potholes are a rite of spring, but are they worse this year, or is this just our perception?
Greg, potholes are better this year than usual.
Get out, okay.
And the reason for that is that we had a long, cold winter, as I'm sure everybody will remember. How potholes form is the freeze-thaw cycle. Water gets into the cracks and freezes and then pops up the asphalt. We didn't have a single thaw this winter. It froze in about September, it felt like, and stayed frozen until recently. So it's actually been a relatively good year for potholes.
Well, there you go. That just goes to show how perception is not always reality.
Correct.
So when the rest of us are cursing this winter, city engineers are celebrating that this is at least good from a roads point of view. It's a good thing.
Certainly, certainly.
Sure.
But I did want to mention it's important for citizens to be aware that the city of Kitchener invests about $30 million a year reconstructing our roads to remove potholes altogether, and we only spend about $500,000 on pothole repair because it's a short-term fix. It doesn't solve the underlying problem. So we invest significant dollars in keeping our roads new and in good repair to start with, so that we don't get the potholes.
And I want to ask you really quickly about updates on road closures. Where can people go to get that information?
Yeah, so that's very important. Construction season is upon us, as I'm sure everybody has noticed. The City of Kitchener website has up-to-date, up-to-the-hour road closure information. We have a Twitter, Kitchener Road Closures, hashtag Kitchener Road Closures, or you can get texted to your phone. You can save a lot of time by just checking which roads are closed and alter your route to suit the road closures that are in your area.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. We're going to have to leave it at that, Barbara, but I really appreciate you coming on.
Okay, thanks,
Thank
Greg.
you. All right, well, we'll be back next week. You're watching Talk Local, and I'm Greg Mercer. Thanks for watching.